Rain poured heavily against the windshield, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and red, when Aisha pulled her old car to the curb. She was exhausted from her double shift at the diner, her mind buzzing with unpaid bills and her daughter's school fees. Just as she was about to drive off, she saw him, stumbling in the rain, expensive suit soaked, his tie crooked, and his eyes glazed with alcohol. He looked like every man who had never known hardship, yet something in the way he leaned against the lamppost, utterly lost, made her hesitate. With a deep sigh, she rolled down her window and called out to him. The man barely registered her voice but staggered toward her car, mumbling words that made little sense. Against her better judgment, she decided to help him, not knowing this choice would forever change her life. The man collapsed into the passenger seat, muttering about meetings, shareholders, and betrayal, before finally giving her an address in the wealthiest part of the city. Aisha almost laughed at the contrast. Her own apartment was small, dimly lit, and cramped with second-hand furniture, while this man was clearly from a world dripping with wealth. As she drove, she caught glimpses of his face in the streetlights, sharp jawline softened by vulnerability, eyes closed as if weighed down by burdens too heavy to carry. He looked powerful yet broken, a strange combination that stirred curiosity in her. She tightened her grip on the wheel, reminding herself this was just another passenger, nothing more. Still, her heart beat faster as she wondered what his story might be. She had no idea that his story would soon collide with hers in ways she never imagined. When they reached his mansion, he didn't move. The house loomed in darkness, the kind that spoke of loneliness despite its grandeur. Aisha hesitated, unsure whether to wake him, when suddenly he whispered, "Don't leave me alone." His voice cracked, raw with something deeper than drunkenness, and it pierced straight into her heart. She gently shook him awake, guiding him to the door, and for a brief moment, his hand tightened around hers like a drowning man clinging to a lifeline. She left him at the threshold, but as she walked back to her car, the echo of his words lingered in her ears. She drove home in silence, unaware that the seeds of something extraordinary had just been planted. Her world was about to be shaken in ways she could never predict. The next morning, Aisha brushed off the night's events, focusing on making breakfast for her daughter, Noor. Noor, bright-eyed and full of questions, was the reason Aisha endured long shifts and sleepless nights. They laughed over burnt toast and shared dreams of a better life, even though reality rarely offered comfort. As Aisha dropped Noor at school, she pushed away thoughts of the drunk stranger, reminding herself that his world was galaxies away from hers. But fate has a way of weaving threads together, no matter how unlikely the pattern. That very evening, as she cleared tables at the diner, she saw him again, sober this time, in a tailored suit, his eyes sharp yet searching. He walked straight toward her, and for reasons she couldn't explain, her breath caught in her throat. The man introduced himself as Omar, CEO of a powerful corporation, his voice calm but carrying a weight she recognized from the night before. He thanked her for helping him and insisted on repaying her kindness. Aisha brushed it off, uncomfortable with the idea of charity, but Omar was persistent. He wasn't like the arrogant businessmen she'd served at the diner before. There was something broken, something human, beneath his polished exterior. He asked her questions about her life, her daughter, and her dreams, as though her words genuinely mattered. The walls she had built around her heart trembled slightly, though she reminded herself not to expect miracles. People like him didn't fall into the lives of women like her, or so she thought. Days turned into weeks, and Omar began appearing at the diner more often, always choosing her section, always asking for her service. At first, she thought it was pity, but soon she realized he enjoyed her company, her honesty, her laughter, and the warmth she carried despite her struggles. Noor met him one afternoon by chance, and to Aisha's surprise, Omar crouched down to her level, speaking to her with kindness and patience, not as a CEO but as a friend. Noor beamed at him as though he were a hero from one of her storybooks. For the first time in years, Aisha felt the stirrings of hope, though fear held her back. Could she trust a man whose world was built on wealth and power, when hers was barely held together by resilience and love? But not everyone looked kindly on their growing connection. Rumors swirled in Omar's corporate world, whispers that he was distracted, spending too much time in a diner instead of boardrooms. His business rivals mocked him, his board questioned his judgment, and even his family accused him of lowering himself. Aisha, too, felt the sting of judgment. Customers stared, neighbors whispered, and even her coworkers warned her against trusting a man like him. Doubt crept into her heart, reminding her of the nights she cried alone when Noor asked why her father had abandoned them. The scars of betrayal still burned, and she wondered if history was about to repeat itself. Fear nearly drove her to push Omar away, but something in his steady gaze kept her rooted. One evening, Omar invited her to a charity gala, insisting she belonged by his side. Aisha hesitated, feeling out of place in the glittering dress he gifted her, but the way he looked at her silenced her insecurities. At the gala, whispers followed them, eyes judged her, but Omar held her hand firmly, introducing her as someone important, someone who mattered. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a struggling waitress, not as a lonely mother, but as a woman worthy of love and respect. Yet, the night ended in conflict when one of Omar's business partners insulted her, calling her unworthy. Aisha left in tears, convinced she could never belong in his world, no matter how much her heart wanted to. The following days were filled with silence, as Aisha avoided his calls, burying herself in work and Noor's laughter. She told herself it was better this way, safer to protect her heart than to risk it breaking again. But Omar was not a man who gave up easily. He arrived at her door one night, rain pouring down just like the first time they met, his eyes filled with determination. He confessed his struggles, his loneliness, and the truth behind his drunken night, that the world he lived in was suffocating, filled with betrayal and empty victories. "You saved me," he whispered, not just that night, but every day since. His words shattered her defenses, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe he meant it. Their relationship blossomed slowly, built not on wealth or appearances but on honesty, laughter, and shared struggles. Omar learned to navigate Noor's world, school plays, bedtime stories, and simple dinners around a small table, while Aisha began to understand the man behind the CEO title. They weren't perfect, but together they found balance, healing wounds neither had dared to confront before. Noor, always the brightest light in Aisha's life, adored Omar, and he adored her back, filling a void she never thought could be healed. Aisha's heart swelled with gratitude, though the fear of losing it all lingered at the edges of her happiness. Still, love has a way of silencing fear when nurtured with trust. The true test came when Omar faced a major business decision, one that required him to either uphold ruthless practices or risk losing millions by choosing integrity. His board pushed him to take the easy path, but Aisha reminded him of the man she saw beneath the suit, the man who once whispered he didn't want to be alone. Strengthened by her faith in him, Omar stood firm, choosing the harder road, proving to himself and the world that he was more than just a CEO driven by profit. It cost him partnerships, but it earned him something far greater, peace. Aisha watched him with pride, knowing her love had helped him rediscover the man he truly wanted to be. In time, the whispers faded, replaced by respect as people saw the changes in Omar's leadership and his life. The same society that once judged Aisha began to admire her strength, though she no longer cared about their approval. What mattered was the life she was building, with Omar by her side and Noor's laughter filling their home. One evening, as the sun set in golden hues, Omar knelt before her, not with extravagance but with sincerity, asking her to share his life, not as a savior or companion, but as his equal. Tears filled her eyes as she accepted, her heart finally free of the chains of fear and loneliness. Their wedding was simple, attended by those who mattered, filled with joy and warmth rather than luxury. Aisha walked down the aisle with Noor holding her hand, the three of them finally forming the family she had always dreamed of. Omar's vows were not promises of riches or grand gestures but of honesty, loyalty, and love, spoken from a man who had once been lost but found his home in her. For the first time in her life, Aisha felt chosen, not because of what she lacked or what she endured, but because of who she was. She knew now that love did not erase pain, but it gave it meaning, turning scars into stories of survival and hope. Years later, their life together was not free of challenges, but it was full of love. Omar still faced pressure in his business, and Aisha still worked hard to balance motherhood and her dreams, but together they carried their burdens with grace. Noor thrived, growing into a young woman surrounded by the love of two parents who believed in her. Their small home became a haven, filled with laughter, arguments, reconciliations, and moments that mattered far more than any riches. Aisha often thought back to that rainy night when she almost drove away, never knowing the stranger in her passenger seat would become her forever. Life had been cruel, but it had also been kind, and she had finally found her place in the world. The lesson Aisha carried with her was simple yet profound, that sometimes, life changes in the most unexpected moments. That a single act of kindness can open doors to love, healing, and new beginnings. That even in the darkest storms, hope can find its way through, if only one dares to take a chance. She had driven a drunk CEO home one rainy night, thinking it was just another burden in her long list of struggles. Instead, she found love, partnership, and the life she had once believed impossible. And with Omar and Noor by her side, she knew she would never be lonely again. Married life was a new chapter for Aisha, filled with both joy and unexpected challenges. At first, the comfort of finally having someone by her side made her feel like she was living in a dream. Omar, despite his powerful status, was attentive and gentle, always trying to balance his time between work, Aisha, and Noor. Yet, the transition was not without struggles. Sharing a life with someone meant facing differences, and Aisha often worried about blending their worlds. She was used to simplicity, while Omar's life came with meetings, luxury, and constant scrutiny. But through every disagreement and every small misunderstanding, their love kept them anchored, reminding them why they chose each other. One of their earliest challenges came when Noor's biological father suddenly reappeared after years of absence. He claimed he wanted to reconnect with his daughter, though Aisha knew it was only because he had heard about Omar's wealth. The sight of him stirred old wounds in her heart, bringing back memories of abandonment and betrayal. Noor was confused, torn between the man who had left and the man who had stepped up to love her. Omar, though hurt by the situation, supported Aisha in every decision, never once trying to force himself into a role that Noor wasn't ready to give. Together, they faced the painful process of explaining to Noor what love, responsibility, and trust truly meant. The situation escalated when Noor's father demanded visitation rights, threatening to take the matter to court. Aisha's fear of losing her daughter consumed her nights, and she often cried in silence, afraid of what the law might decide. Omar stood firmly by her side, using his influence not as a weapon but as a shield, ensuring that Noor's best interests remained at the center of every discussion. In the courtroom, Noor's voice carried the greatest weight when she chose to stay with her mother and Omar, expressing that love was not about blood but about who showed up. Tears streamed down Aisha's face as the judge ruled in her favor, and Omar's steady hand held hers as their little family remained whole. That ordeal only strengthened their bond, teaching them that love was not just about romance but about fighting together through storms. Aisha admired Omar's patience and humility, realizing that beneath his powerful exterior was a man willing to bend and compromise for her happiness. Omar, in turn, found inspiration in Aisha's resilience, her ability to face battles with courage even when the odds were stacked against her. Noor, too, blossomed under the love of two parents who never let her feel alone. For the first time, Aisha allowed herself to imagine a future where happiness was not temporary but lasting, rooted in trust and unconditional love. But happiness was soon tested again when Omar's company faced its biggest crisis yet. A competitor launched a brutal campaign to sabotage his reputation, spreading false accusations of corruption and fraud. The media storm was relentless, painting Omar as a greedy businessman who exploited the weak. Strangers judged them in public, whispering and pointing, and Aisha felt the sting of society's cruelty once again. Though Omar tried to remain calm, the stress took its toll on him, and sleepless nights became his routine. Aisha refused to let him fight alone. She stood beside him, encouraging him to stay true to his integrity and reminding him that the truth always finds light. In the darkest moments, Aisha became his strength. She cooked meals for him when he forgot to eat, stayed awake with him during endless phone calls, and offered words of comfort when doubt crept in. Their home, once filled with laughter, now echoed with tension, but together they fought to keep love alive. Noor, too, played her part, often leaving small notes for Omar that said things like, "You're my hero," or, "We believe in you." Those little gestures reminded him that beyond the corporate world, he had something far greater, a family worth fighting for. Slowly, the truth began to surface, and Omar's innocence was proven. The victory was not just professional but deeply personal, restoring his name and their peace. The ordeal taught them that love thrives not in perfect conditions but in trials, in the willingness to hold on when everything threatens to fall apart. Aisha realized that her journey from loneliness to love was not just about finding a partner but about finding strength she never knew she had. Omar, too, discovered that his wealth and status meant nothing compared to the warmth of a home filled with laughter, even if that home was modest compared to his mansion. Together, they rebuilt their lives stronger than before, each challenge shaping them into better versions of themselves. Their bond was no longer fragile, it was unbreakable. As Noor grew older, she began to dream of studying abroad, her eyes set on becoming a doctor. The thought of letting her go terrified Aisha, who had built her entire world around her daughter. Omar reassured her that love meant giving Noor wings to fly, even if it meant enduring the ache of distance. They worked together to save for her education, and when the day finally came for Noor to leave, Aisha cried in Omar's arms at the airport. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with both pride and sorrow, but she knew their daughter's future was bright. Omar whispered in her ear that just as Noor needed wings, they needed to keep building their own journey together. With Noor away, Aisha and Omar faced a new phase in their marriage, one that required them to rediscover each other beyond parenting. They traveled, laughed more, and spent long evenings talking about dreams they had never dared to voice before. Aisha began pursuing a long-buried passion for writing, and Omar supported her wholeheartedly, even setting up a small home office where she could work on her stories. To her surprise, her writings, often about resilience and love, gained attention online, inspiring others who faced struggles similar to hers. For the first time, Aisha felt her voice mattered, not just within her home but in the world beyond it. But even in this season of growth, shadows lingered. Omar's health began to show signs of strain, the years of stress finally catching up to him. Aisha noticed the weariness in his eyes, the way he held his chest when he thought no one was watching. Her heart clenched with fear, and memories of the loneliness she once endured threatened to resurface. Yet, instead of crumbling, she rose to the challenge. She became his caretaker, reminding him of the importance of rest, nutrition, and balance. Their roles shifted, once he had saved her from loneliness, and now it was her turn to save him from exhaustion. Their love, tested through every trial, shone brightest in those quiet moments of vulnerability. They no longer needed grand gestures to prove their devotion, instead, it was in the simple acts: a cup of tea shared at dawn, a hand held through sleepless nights, a whispered prayer for strength. They realized that love was not about perfection but persistence, about choosing each other every single day despite flaws, fears, and fatigue. In those tender moments, Aisha felt grateful for the night long ago when she stopped her car in the rain. A stranger had stepped in, and from that stranger came the life she had once thought impossible. Years passed, and Noor returned home, not just as a doctor but as a woman inspired by her parents' love story. She often told her friends that her mother taught her strength, and her father taught her patience, and together they showed her what true love looked like. Watching her succeed filled Omar and Aisha with pride, knowing their sacrifices had borne fruit. Their home became fuller once again, filled with laughter, joy, and the presence of the family they had built against all odds. They were no longer defined by loneliness, struggle, or judgment, they were defined by resilience, unity, and love. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, Omar and Aisha sat on their porch, hands entwined, watching Noor laugh in the garden. "Do you ever regret stopping that night?" Omar asked softly, his voice tinged with emotion. Aisha smiled, tears brimming in her eyes, and shook her head. "No," she whispered, "because that night I didn't just save you, you saved me too." They sat in silence, the weight of their shared journey pressing gently on their hearts, both grateful for the storms that had brought them to this place of peace. Aisha had once believed her story was about survival, about enduring loneliness and hardship. But as she looked at the man beside her and the daughter before her, she realized her story was about love in its purest form, love that heals, transforms, and endures. She knew life would never be free of challenges, but she also knew that with Omar and Noor by her side, she would never face them alone. Her once broken heart had been mended, not by fairy tale magic, but by the simple, extraordinary power of choosing love, every single day. Noor returned from her studies a woman transformed, with the calm confidence of a doctor and the tender compassion of a daughter who never forgot her roots. Her parents had given her wings, but they also gave her a home she could always return to. She settled into a new routine, working long shifts at the hospital while helping Aisha with small chores at home. Though she appeared strong to everyone around her, Noor carried her own quiet loneliness. She watched patients surrounded by loved ones and families, while she returned home to her empty apartment each night. Love seemed like something far away, something her parents had found against all odds, but something she doubted was meant for her. One late evening at the hospital, Noor was assigned to a difficult case. A car accident victim rushed in with life-threatening injuries. The patient was a young man named Zion, who had been hit while helping an elderly woman cross the street. His condition was critical, and Noor worked tirelessly alongside her team, refusing to give up even when hope seemed slim. For hours, she fought for his life, and when his heartbeat finally stabilized, she felt tears sting her eyes. She told herself it was relief as a doctor, nothing more, but deep down something stirred. There was something about saving someone's life that connected souls in a way words never could. In the following weeks, Zion remained under Noor's care, recovering slowly. Unlike many patients, he was soft-spoken, deeply grateful, and carried an air of humility that intrigued her. He often asked about her day instead of focusing on his pain, and he listened with genuine interest when she spoke. Noor found herself lingering by his bedside longer than necessary, laughing at his jokes and admiring his quiet resilience. She told herself it was only professional compassion, but her heart betrayed her, racing each time she saw his smile. A dangerous thought grew inside her: what if love could find her here, in the most unexpected place? Zion's backstory unfolded like pieces of a puzzle. He wasn't wealthy or powerful, but he had a heart full of kindness. Raised in an orphanage, he had worked odd jobs since childhood, eventually building a small business that sold affordable books to children in poor communities. His accident had left him struggling, his shop temporarily closed, and his future uncertain. Noor listened to him with admiration, realizing that his dreams were not of wealth but of making a difference. It reminded her of her mother's lessons, that true strength is not in status but in kindness and persistence. Without meaning to, she found herself drawn to him more each day. As Zion healed, Noor faced a battle within herself. She knew her parents had endured judgment for their love, and she feared history repeating itself. She was the daughter of a CEO now, living in comfort, while Zion was a man struggling to make ends meet. She imagined the whispers, the gossip, the raised eyebrows, and she wondered if she had the strength to withstand it. Part of her wanted to walk away before feelings grew deeper, to shield herself from heartache. Yet, every time she saw Zion's gentle eyes, her heart whispered a different truth, that love was not meant to be calculated, only embraced. Eventually, Zion was discharged, and Noor thought it would end there. But fate had other plans. He visited her at the hospital weeks later, not for himself but to deliver books for the children in the pediatric ward. She found him in the hallway, arms full of colorful storybooks, smiling at the children who ran to greet him. The sight made her heart swell, tears prickling her eyes as she realized the depth of his kindness. That moment shattered her defenses. Love was not about wealth or security, it was about choosing someone whose heart aligned with yours. Noor knew then that she was already falling, whether she admitted it or not. Their bond grew quietly, away from the world's gaze. They shared conversations over tea, long walks in the park, and dreams whispered under the stars. Zion encouraged Noor in her medical career, reminding her of the lives she was changing, while Noor pushed Zion to rebuild his bookshop, offering her support. Together, they dreamed of creating something greater, a foundation that combined books and health, giving underprivileged children both knowledge and care. For the first time in her life, Noor felt her heart was not just full, but overflowing. It was love, steady and grounding, the kind her parents had shown her was possible. But not everyone celebrated their union. When Omar first learned of Zion, his protective instincts flared. He worried for his daughter, questioning whether Zion could provide stability in the long run. Aisha, however, reminded him of their own story, how love had once crossed impossible barriers for them. Still, Omar struggled, torn between a father's fear and the respect he had for his daughter's choices. Noor confronted him gently but firmly, reminding him that she had learned resilience from him, and now it was her turn to walk her own path. It was not an easy conversation, but eventually Omar's heart softened, realizing his daughter's happiness mattered more than his fears. Their love story, however, was not without trials. Zion's financial struggles deepened when his shop faced eviction, and Noor offered to help. Pride clashed with desperation, and he initially refused, unwilling to be seen as a burden. Arguments flared, painful words were spoken, and for a brief time, Noor feared their love might crumble under the weight of reality. But love, when true, demands humility. Zion returned, apologizing, confessing that his fear of inadequacy had blinded him. Noor held him close, whispering that love was not about who provided more but about who stood together when the world fell apart. They began building their dream together, combining her medical expertise and his passion for education. The foundation they created touched countless lives, offering free health checkups and distributing books in underserved areas. Their love grew alongside their mission, grounded in purpose rather than luxury. The world, once skeptical, began to admire them, not for their status but for their impact. Aisha watched her daughter with pride, tears often welling in her eyes as she saw history repeating itself, not in pain, but in hope. Omar, too, eventually embraced Zion as a son, seeing the honesty in his eyes and the unwavering love he gave Noor. The day Zion proposed was not extravagant. He took her to the very spot where she had first saved his life, standing under the same hospital lights that once flickered during his near-death struggle. With trembling hands, he offered her a simple ring, his voice steady as he said, "You saved my life, Noor, not just my body but my heart. Will you share your life with me?" Tears streamed down Noor's cheeks as she whispered yes, her heart overflowing with joy. Their embrace under the quiet night sky marked the beginning of a love story destined to inspire others. Their wedding was a blend of simplicity and warmth, attended by family, friends, and the very children whose lives they had touched through their foundation. Aisha and Omar sat side by side, hands entwined, watching their daughter step into her own destiny. For Aisha, it was like reliving her own journey, but this time with pride instead of fear. She whispered to Omar, "She's stronger than I ever was," and he smiled, replying, "Because she had you to guide her." Their family circle had expanded, and with it, their legacy of love. As Noor settled into married life, she discovered that love came with its own challenges but also immeasurable joy. She and Zion faced long hours, financial constraints, and the balancing act of managing their foundation, but they did it together. Each hardship reminded her of her mother's wisdom, that love was not about avoiding storms but dancing in the rain. She often called Aisha for advice, and every conversation left her stronger. Slowly, she realized that her parents' story had not only shaped her but prepared her for the life she now lived. Over time, Noor and Zion's foundation flourished, drawing attention from communities and philanthropists who admired their work. They expanded into new cities, reaching children who had once been forgotten. Though their lives were busy, they never forgot to nurture their love, whether through stolen moments of laughter or quiet evenings together after long days. They discovered that true wealth was not in money or possessions but in the lives they touched and the love they shared. And in that wealth, they were richer than they had ever imagined. Aisha and Omar, now older, watched their daughter's journey with full hearts. Their once small home echoed with the laughter of not just Noor and Zion but the many children who came through their programs. They saw their legacy alive in every smile, every healed wound, every child who carried a book or received medical care. Their love had planted seeds that had grown into a forest, shading countless lives. Aisha often sat quietly, reflecting on the night long ago when she stopped to help a stranger. That choice had not only changed her life but also Noor's and so many others. Years later, Noor held her own child in her arms, a tiny girl with bright eyes and an unbreakable grip on her finger. Zion stood beside her, tears glistening in his eyes, overwhelmed by the miracle of family. As Noor rocked her daughter to sleep, she whispered promises of love, strength, and hope. She thought of her mother's journey, of the sacrifices and courage that had built the foundation she now stood on. She knew she carried not just her own story but the legacy of resilience passed down from her parents. And she vowed to continue that legacy, teaching her child that love, no matter how unexpected, could change everything. One evening, 3 generations sat together, Aisha, Omar, Noor, Zion, and the new baby, laughter echoing across their home. Aisha looked at the circle of love around her and felt tears stream down her face. She whispered to herself, "Loneliness once defined me, but love redefined my life." Omar squeezed her hand, understanding without words, while Noor smiled knowingly, carrying forward the torch of love. The circle was complete, yet still growing, proof that kindness, resilience, and courage can ripple through generations. What began with one lonely night in the rain had become a story of love that would live forever.